Welcome to Osh After the Bell podcast, where we bring you a fun and informative conversation about everything outside school hours care and give a voice to our fellow educators. So buckle up.
Hi everyone, welcome to Osh After the Bell podcast. Today we have with us Barbie and our special guest, Mark Williams. Mark is a professor in cognitive neuroscience. I had to write this up. So cognitive neuroscience. I do not know much about cognitive neuroscience, so I'm going to hand up to Mark first. But before that, how are we feeling, Mark? Welcome to our podcast. How are you feeling?
Thank you. Very good. And thank you both for inviting me along.
Yes.
So cognitive neuroscience is a pretty recent addition to the neurosciences. Basically, 50 years ago, we had psychology, which was study of the mind. And then we had neuroscience, which was studying the brain, but it was all in animals because we didn't have access to the brain in humans. There was cognitive psychology or cognitive neuropsychology, but it's still focused on the mind and often focused on the mind in patients who either had brain damage or had some sort of other abnormality, so they could look at what happened in the mind when you had that sort of abnormality. About 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we started getting new technologies where we're actually able to look inside a human brain rather than looking inside animal brains. And that is MRIs became more sophisticated. So we got functional MRI, which is something I specialize in. We got a lot better at EEG, encephalography, and we got other techniques such as transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is just basically using a big magnet to knock out a different part of the brain, different parts of the brain, so you can actually look at behavior. And so that's when cognitive neuroscience was born, because we had neuroscientists who started looking at how humans' brains functioned rather than how animal brains function. And so that's what I do. I look at how our human brain functions. There was also the development of studying neuroplasticity. So we realized around the same time, about 25 years ago, that the brain changes throughout our lives. So we did have this strange idea that we had these developmental stages that we went through as a kid, and then our brain was stuck like that, and then that's the way our brain was for the rest of our lives. Now that we know is nonsense, and our brains continue to change throughout our lives. So neuroplasticity, the changing of the brain, happens throughout our lives, and your brain now is different to the way it was half an hour ago, and it will be different again in an hour's time, depending on how much you actually listen to what I have to say. That is, of course, learning. That's what happens. So us as cognitive neuroscientists, we are actually just looking at how the brain does what it does and how it learns. And we do that in humans rather than in animals. So to me, it's what all teachers should be learning, because it's how our brains work and it's what they do, right? They actually teach kids so that their brains change, so that they get better at doing things, so that they can do things better in the future.
So there is hope for all of us to learn new things.
There absolutely is. It's just been shown that even a language, you can become fluent at a language in your old age. So there was a whole theory that languages, you couldn't become fluent at them once you got past, 8 years of age, 9 years of age. It's now been shown you can actually do it in your later years. And it's really important that we do that. So we do know that it's a use it or lose it scenario. So our brain is plastic all the time, and functions or abilities that you don't use, you actually lose those abilities. And ones that you do use, you become stronger, just like a muscle, right? You've got to actually exercise, otherwise, you atrophy. And if you've ever had a broken arm, you know how quickly you can atrophy your muscles. Same thing happens with our brain. And that's one of the big problems at the moment, is that a lot of what we do, we're actually defaulting to devices rather than actually using our brains ourselves. So we're actually losing a lot of those functions. And that's a real concern. It's a real concern for me. I get out, I do a lot of podcasts and a lot of seminars on smartphones making us dumb. And there's a lot of evidence now showing that they actually are making us dumb, that we're actually defaulting to the smartphone rather than actually using these capacities ourselves. And if we don't use them, we know we lose them. And a lot of research on that, both in kids and in adults and seniors, that you atrophy quicker and you can end up dying earlier if you're not actually using those functions. So it is a real concern.
So we are literally disabling ourselves instead of enabling ourselves. And you mentioned something about neuroplasticity, and you also used the word you lose it. That's is it synapses pruning when we do not have those connection between the those intelligent things? I'm not going to go there because I'm not a neuroscientist. So, but if you don't use it, the connection between the neurons.
Yeah. So they basically atrophy. So we know that the idea is heavy in learning is how we all learn, which is that cells that fire together wire together. So all the cells that are firing at the same time wire and become stronger and stronger and stronger. And if there's asynchrony, or the neurons aren't firing together, then you get atrophy of those neurons. So they decrease in their functioning. And so, when you get cells that fire together, they're all going to wire together. When you don't get cells firing together, or you're not actually using those functions, then those functions will atrophy as we go along. And we also know our memory works in the same way. The more you use a memory, we now know that memories aren't actually formed so that we can remember the past, which is something that we've always thought of memories. Now we know memories are actually formed so that we can function in the future. So unless you're actually using your memories, unless there's actually a reason for having those memories, you don't hold on to them. So at night time when we're sleeping, there's several different stages of sleep. And one of those is actually pruning out all the memories that you're not using, or you're not going to use, your brain assumes you're not going to use in the future, and laying down new memories that you learned that day or you've learned recently that you'll need in the future. So another thing that we really need to get across to kids is why they're actually learning things, because then their brain will actually lay down those memories for the future so they can actually use them. But any stuff that they're not using, they're actually going to lose. And we all do that. Right. We all get rid of the stuff that we're not going to use because we've only got a certain amount of space in there, which is why I do a lot of work around, how to actually teach kids to learn, and also how teachers can actually test kids so that they learn. Because at the moment, what we do is we actually test them so that they don't learn, basically. If you test a child at the end of doing whatever they're doing, then they actually don't remember that because it's over now, right? They don't need to remember the future because they've already been tested on it. What you need to do is test them at the start so they know what they've got to learn, and then they actually learn it better when you actually do it that way. So, it's a big problem in that most schools and probably after school care centres are centred around this testing to work out if they've remembered it, which is the wrong time to test. You've got to test.
So we, one of the courses at uni, which we look at, and at times we, and I really have a huge respect for this lady, Katie, who taught me these things. And it really worked in my life as well, because it, as you said about testing and the importance of assessments in learning. And we looked at the importance of summative, formative, and diagnostic assessment. And what I felt about diagnostic assessment as I talk to my students, or when I talk to myself, is that it just makes you curious about what's coming up. It's like it just gives you a litmus test, as you may say, that, hey, you know what? I actually don't know these things when my teacher asks me. It just makes you a bit more curious, and you go, I'm ready. Or let's say you can also check out, like, I'm not ready for this. But it's like a very fundamental thing you said about the memory as to when memory is building, or when we memorize things, it's not for the past, but for the future. So that's like a shift in paradigm. What do you think about this, Barbi? This testing and memory system?
Yeah, well, I was even thinking about just even my own studies, my own university. I don't remember anything. Like, it's like you finish and you're like, I can't even list you probably 5 subjects I studied out of I have no idea. There was like 8 a year. And I guess since that, would there be more cause for ongoing learning too? So, like, you know how some people might think they've learned something like a language and then they kind of stop, and you said there's that, what did you say? Use it or lose it. But the same with what we want to know. Like, if you've learned a language, but then don't speak it for a few years, that's going to slowly dissipate, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you're entrenched in it, so we know we learn languages much better if we're actually in the country where that language is actually being spoken. We learn it quicker, and we learn it more fluently because we're constantly using it and we need to use it to actually get around. Whereas if you learn it in isolation, then you don't learn it as fluently and as well. And then if you stop learning it, you're going to lose it very quickly. Whereas if you're surrounded by it all the time, then you're going to keep that stronger than you would have otherwise. Yeah, so it's really important for language.
I think how I can say about language acquisition, given that English is not my first language, that if I was not in Australia, I would still be speaking English, but not ever, like I've started thinking in English. I think I dream in English now. So I think that's where, but if like my sister and I grew up together, and she is very smart. She's pays me to say that she's not that smart, but she's very smart, and we studied in the same schools, and but if I talk to her in English, there will be a lag. She will have to think as to what she has learned, and then memorize. She must have memorized things for the future, as we now know, and as it is happening, it's hard to improvise for her, harder to improvise for her, and I think that's just only because I'm in Australia that I'm surrounded by people that are. So Mark, would you say that I'm unconsciously learning now, like that is perhaps I'm not paying attention to it, but my mind or brain is still learning English because I'm surrounded by that? Is that what's happening to me?
Yeah, we can't actually learn unconsciously. So we've got to actually attend. So there's 5 essential things to actually learn. You've got to have first connection with the person who's teaching you, or whatever the subject happens to be. You've got to have attention. So you've got to be attending to what actually is happening. You've got to be engaged with the topic or the thing that you're doing. You've got to have error feedback, and it's got to be instantaneous. So the error feedback has to be straight away. And then you got to have consolidation. So that happens usually during sleep, but you can improve that by actually thinking about what it was you were thinking about and actually trying to put that into categories or groups so that it actually consolidates and you remember it better. So those are the 5 essential things for learning. And because you need attention and you need error feedback, you've got to have consciousness to have those, right? You've got to actually be aware of what you're doing. So, those tapes that you listen to at night when you go to sleep, they don't actually help with learning. You don't learn anything once you're asleep. You do learn better what you heard just before you go to sleep, though. So when we actually lay down our memories at night, because your memories are laid down at night, they're not laid down at all during the day. Your memory formation happens at night when you're sleeping, and it does it in reverse order. So the stuff that you did just before you went to sleep is the first stuff that gets laid down, and the stuff that you did in the morning is the last stuff to get laid down. So if you're actually studying for exams or you're trying to remember something, you're best to read it just before you go to sleep. Don't pick up your phone or anything like that, because that interferes with your short-term memory, and so therefore you don't actually remember what you were just doing before you picked up your phone or whatever it is. But if you read something just before you go to sleep, you'll remember it much better than if you read it earlier in the day.
Because there's so much other learning happening during the day for our brains to go back to what it was. Is that the reason why? There's a cognitive load of
we don't know why. Just for some reason, the brain seems to just start at the last thing and just slowly go backwards through it. I mean, the other really cool thing about sleep that I love is that we actually go through scenarios at night, which is why sleep's so important for both kids and teenagers, because they go through in fast forward all the different scenarios that could have happened that day. So you rehearse what actually happened, but then you go through lots of different options as to what could have happened if I had done things slightly differently, or if other people had done things slightly differently. And that's how we learn a lot of our emotion regulation and our socialization, is through those fast forward rehearsals of what actually happened that day and how things could have turned out differently if I had done things differently, or if other people had done things differently, which is really interesting. And we do that in fast forward. So you can do whole versions of your day, or you do whole versions of your day, 1,000, 2,000 different versions of it in a couple of hours.
Could that be contributing to why there's probably more anxiety? I would say, because they're not, a lot of people are using their phone straight before sleep, so they're not getting that. So you said it affects that short-term memory, and then they may not go through that process of that emotional regulation, going through all those scenarios at night. So they wake up and it's kind of still there.
Yeah, so there's several problems. One is that they don't sleep as well because of the fact that the blue light, because you've got the blue light issues, and you've also got the stress associated with being on a device. So we know kids and teens If they're on a screen, you get an increase in cortisol levels, which means that they're actually more stressed. And if they're on a screen just before they go to sleep or try to go to sleep, then they're more stressed, and you're less likely to sleep well if you're stressed. They are also sleeping a lot less than they used to. So you need 8 hours of sleep, because we go through 5 different stages. There's arguments as to whether it's 4 or 5, but let's say 5 different stages during your sleep. And each of those stages, you go through that round, basically, the 5 stages, 8 times during the night if you sleep for 8 hours. Now, the first time you go through it, basically you focus more on resetting your brain. So your brain goes, some of those stages, what it does is it gets rid of all the old neurotransmitters, and it gets rid of a lot of the toxins and so on in your brain, so that it's healthier, if you like. And also goes through like a defrag, where it actually looks at what memories aren't being used and stuff and gets rid of those. It focuses on those areas in the first 4 or 5 times it goes through. And so you don't actually get to the memory formation and the rehearsal stages until the latest time. So therefore, if you only sleep for 6 hours, you miss out on the best times, or the best versions of laying down memories and rehearsing what actually happened, because those stages, so the first 4 stages are longer during the first times through, and the times when you lay down the memories and do the rehearsals, they're much shorter at the start of the thing. And then the last 2 hours, they're much longer, and you spend a lot more time in them. So if you're only sleeping for 6 hours a day, then you're not getting the best memory formation, and you're not getting the best rehearsal time that you should be getting. So, especially kids and teens need to be doing that 8 hours of sleep. The other big problem is that teens, if you're going to sleep, well, we have a shift in our sleeping during our teen times by 3 hours. So if your teen is going to bed at, say, 9 o'clock at night, going to sleep at 9 o'clock at night, at the beginning of the teenage years, they will not be able to get to sleep until 12 o'clock at night by the end of the teenage years. Because you automatically shift back by 3 hours during your teen years. We're not sure why, but that happens automatically to all teenagers.
We all just go, it's teenagers.
Yeah. That explains my 1 a.m. sleep pattern. And I'm just...
So if you're not going to sleep as a 13-year-old until 10 o'clock, you're not going to be able to get to sleep until 1 o'clock in the morning when you're in your late teens, which means if you've got to then get up for school or get up for sport at 6 a.m., you're not getting nearly enough sleep during the night, which is why they know just pushing back the start time for schools by 1 hour increases learning by about 25%. So if schools actually start at 10 rather than 9, it increases their learning in that school by about 25-30%.
That would mean that some parents would not like this, given that they have to be at work.
Yeah, there is that problem, and that's why
I think that's the biggest problem.
But then you can, the school day can be the same. So that's with exactly the same school day, right? It's just it's back by an hour. So yeah, actually sleep. Or you put your kids to bed earlier when they're younger, so therefore they don't fall asleep so late when they're older.
Earlier, there's so much of information. In fact, I think I would have to listen to this. I'm writing these notes down. I'm 2 pages done. So what I've done is I said to myself, listen to this again. So let's say this is easier to remember that way, like while I'm driving or something. But there is something which you mentioned about learning, memory, and then I was talking about assessment and something. There's one thing which distinguishes after school care from school, and that is that we do not have a curriculum or outcomes to achieve.
We've got outcomes.
We do have outcomes, but we don't have them set as this is what you have to do by the end of this year. These are the outcomes which our program is created in a way, our curriculum is created in a way which is learning through play and leisure. So that is, we become the facilitators of any learning which is happening and against the learning which should have happened. So as a classroom teacher, I would go with a set mind. Of course, my approach could be different. My strategies or pedagogical approach would be different about certain things which I want to teach my students. Whereas as soon as I walk into after school care, it becomes very much child driven. And the learning is influenced by, let's say, curiosity. Humanist philosopher Jacques Rousseau and Froebel's work on kindergarten, children in garden. That's what we have based our work on. So this diagnostic versus summative versus ongoing learning, what we do is we write learning stories in after school care. So as children are doing something, we facilitate certain learning. Now, of course, we prompt them for certain things, that is basketball, cricket and all that. We prompt them. We also provide opportunities for homework or any other tuition classes they are taking. How does this learning, like I'm still learning about learning here and memorizing things. Our educators who are listening to this and they want to be the facilitators of this amazing learning to happen, and more about brain knowledge and mind knowledge would help them facilitate that better. So given that we do not have a way to test, but rather explore and document, what do you think about that, Mark? And this way of documenting, and perhaps through those documents, we can then decide what to do tomorrow. So it doesn't position us.
So there's several aspects to that have sort of been sadly mixed up in a lot of settings now, and they're actually causing issues for learning. So play is extremely important for us to learn socialization, how to actually communicate, empathy. And so that play is really important for kids, especially younger kids, but all through life, play is really important. And that works best when it's completely unstructured, so that the kids can work out their own way of dealing with things. And occasionally, someone will take the bat and ball and go home or whatever. And that's what happens, and you have to negotiate with that. And that's really important for kids to learn. And that's the socialization, connecting with kids and all those sorts of things. And that's really important. And we shouldn't downplay that at all. And they need to do that a certain amount of time every day and all those sorts of things. There's also what we call experiential or student-led learning or inquiry-based learning. They call it lots of different things. They've actually brought up these things for the last, let's say, 50 years. Those in the education area have come up with these different ways, which are all basically the same way, which are called experience. Started off as calling experiential. Now I think it's called inquiry-based learning, where the students decide what they're actually going to learn about, and they go and try and learn it. Or the teacher says, go and try and learn this or whatever. That doesn't work. That's really, really bad for learning. It frustrates children. Because of your working memory, you can't actually do that. There's a whole bunch of reasons why. The reason why it keeps changing names is that it was called experiential, and then a whole bunch of scientists showed that it didn't work and was really detrimental. So they changed it to another name, and then they changed, and now they call it inquiry-based learning. It's basically the same thing, which is you allow them to actually decide. It doesn't work. You've actually got to have structure, and you've got to actually have explicit teaching for kids to actually learn anything in relation to that. And then they've actually got to try it. So the best way to do it is show, tell, and do, or tell, show, and do, where you actually have explicit teaching where you say, this is what we're going to do today, and this is what we're going to do, blah, 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 and then show them how to do it, blah, 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 and then allow them to do it themselves. And then that way you get actual learning. So we need to be really careful. Inquiry-based learning has become a big thing in Australia, and it doesn't work. So we need to, realise that. You need explicit teaching before the kids actually do it, rather than actually doing inquiry-based. And the other thing is, there's also this idea that it's student-led learning, which again, also there's lots of evidence showing it doesn't work, because students actually don't know. You don't know what you want to learn until you actually learn it, right? So you don't go to university and go, I want to become a teacher, so I'm going to learn all the stuff to do with teaching by myself, or I'm going to decide all the different things that I've got to learn to become a teacher, right? Because you don't know all the different things. You've got to have people who are experts to actually teach. And same with at any level, right? This whole idea that students actually know what they want to learn before they actually learn it is completely, put in the horse, but the cart before the horse or whatever. You've got to actually teach them what they want to actually learn. Having some sort of structure is ideal when you want them to learn. But play is great, and they need time to play as well, and we need play. But you should separate the two. And for some reason, they put it all together, and they're going, oh, they can play, and they can have student-led learning, and then they can have inquiry-based learning. We can stick it all together, and it'll all work wonderfully. And it doesn't; it falls apart really quickly. But you do need time for play, and you do need time to learn social stuff. But you also, if you want them to learn something, you need to say, this is what we're going to learn, and you need to be there teaching them as a teacher, which is awesome.
Oh, sorry, Sarah. You go.
No, you go, Bobby. You go.
I was just thinking, even the connection, like say with learning sometimes in out of school hours care, like that can even go with, say, we might just want the children to remember our rules.
Yep.
And it's a matter of kind of telling them about it, not just being like, okay, that's our rules over there, and kind of discussing with them. And I think even role modeling, like if I can't think of a rule off the top of my head, you'd want the staff to do that the children do, like not swing from a tree. All right. Maybe the staff don't do that too, like all those different, like it's all connected.
Yeah. And I think
demonstrate it.
Yeah, and when you mentioned about learning, this is something which I want to add. We actually do that. We do have structured and unstructured learning. So the unstructured learning, or let's say student-led learning, how I might say in after school care we do that is, we would say these are 4 options you have.
Yeah.
And there is a 5th option, which is a leisure, because we say play and leisure, because there are children who might actually not want to learn anything on that particular day. They just don't want to be that. Let's put it this way. Yeah. So we have certain people say, hey, I'm going to teach you how to make, pick one, Barbie. I'm not really good at this. Oh, cricket. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to throw a ball. Yeah, I'm good at it. I got paid to play cricket and I just miss it. So anyway, so I would say, hey, those who want to learn how to play cricket or throw balls or something like that, we are going to do it this over here. But then there's a structure to that, right? Those who want to play basketball, it's here. Those who want to do hammer beats are there here. So I think this is where we have this structure facilitators who otherwise, you're right, child would go, well, there's no target, there's no protocol to follow. What am I doing? And my brain would be so much attracted to other things, and why not? Rightly so. There's a butterfly going. Why would I be slip and fall into learning? It's just like an unstructured, unimaginative learning. Whereas we have a really good combination of this thing, where we allow them to learn hammer beats and paint and draw and color, and we give them options. And I think at the end of the day, when they do when they record this learning, that they can, so from now, after this podcast, maybe they can document as to why do they call it learning? How did they acquire this knowledge? What did you do as a teacher or facilitator, as an educator, and what did the students got to achieve? And how could you say that they learned? Maybe because of the results you see, like they drew a dinosaur. I mean, they went for a rat, but it came up as a dinosaur. That's my drawing. But you can see that, they did something. So it's like, that's your learning story, because there's an A and there's a B, and then a B is an acquired knowledge.
I call it flexible structured learning. When you actually give them options and then they actually choose those options.
That's what happens a lot.
Yeah, which is a great way to go, because then the students feel as though they're actually in control, which is important. But they're actually not in control. You've decided options, and then they go and choose one of those options, and then you get explicit teaching around that, or depending on what it actually is. And so they feel as though they've done it, but they've actually not. And I mean, that's why kids love gaming, right? The video games are all around a flexible, structured situation. You can't actually just do whatever you want on a game. You actually go through a path. But kids feel as though they're actually making choices all the way through. They're actually making no choices at all. They're actually being taken on a journey through each level, so they get to the end.
Yes.
Right? And that's why they work so well. They're really bad for kids, but they work really well at engaging the students in it, because they feel as though they're making choices all the way through when they're actually making no choices at all.
It's really surprising to hear that about gaming, because I've never thought about it, but it makes complete sense when you hear it like that, that there isn't a choice. There's kind of just one way to get to the end, and they've got to work their way through it. And especially for a child, like they can go through it, and I guess most games they die over and over and over again. Like they can do that hundreds of times, but they still keep going.
Yeah. So that means, would you say, Mark, that for a child or a teenager, or for all of us to learn and have willingness in learning, that choices are important, or a sense that we have a choice?
Yeah, that helps with engagement. So, which is one of the 5 necessary things. So you're going to be more engaged if you feel as though it was your choice.
Yeah, the number 3.
You're doing.
I wrote it. Engagement is number 3 after connection. Okay, good.
Yeah. I mean, the big problem at the moment is that engagement is really seen as the key thing. I think mainly within the Department of Education, in all states in Australia, but all around the world, it's all about engagement, and we're testing whether or not kids are engaged in these processes. But engagement is only one of the 5.
Yeah.
And just because you've got engagement doesn't mean you've got learning. And I think that's a real big issue. And if you look at all the teaching apps that are out there, they'll all look at engagement, and they'll show the kids are actually engaged on the app, but none of them show that there's actually learning outcomes associated.
Yeah. I think that's important for us to remember.
This is very relevant to one of the things I noticed, and for those who work in after school care, although this is so relevant to everything else and to my own personal life right now, especially with the sleep patterns. When we look at engagement and how we measure success because children were engaged, that is that's an Achilles heel, because many educators in after school care fall for that. Like, so I had the opportunity to observe one of the staff members talking to children, and it was like around 20 minutes she kept talking, 15 to 20 minutes, and they were sitting down listening. And then I had a chat with this educator. I said, hey, so how do you measure? Like, what do you think happened? Like, how was it? Like, it was, how did it go? Like, if I give you 10 marks to work on, how did you say? Like, 10 out of 10. Like, okay, cool. Okay, so how do you measure that 10 out of 10? Like, what happened for you that you will self-assess that 10 out of 10? And she says, everybody was listening. Or everybody was sitting there, everybody was available.
It was quiet.
Yeah. So when I see that, let's say if we, as a bird, like a flower on the wall, and I'm looking down, sure, it looks engaging. It looks engaged because there's no voice or anything, right? So the number 3 is ticked, but and maybe we can say attention, maybe because they all were looking at this individual, so maybe attention, but but we don't know if they were connected. And we don't even know if they were cognitively engaged, or just looking behind her, or a tree, or behind her, or a leaf, or a dog, or a child, or a bag, or maybe looking but dreaming about something else. And definitely that was a great thing. Now when I look at the step number 4 about the feedback, because one of the things I did ask her was to, hey, so you did all of that. How do you know children know that what you did, they got the game? Because there was no. And so one of the recommendation I gave was like, hey, well, how about a child who already knows this game explains other children about this peer interaction, something like that. So, the kids are always more attractive than adults. Let's face it. If I'm saying something and a child is saying something, they're going to listen to the child, unless I'm saying it in a way that is funnier, perhaps. And the way we measure our teaching, or perhaps learning, teaching strategies, and it's so driven by how we might have learned or not learned, now apparently, the way we might have memorized or not memorized. And we are so convinced that our ways are so right. Knowing more about the brain, it looks like engagement, attention is so crucial.
Yeah, so I mean, you brought up some great points there. One of them's the error feedback, which is one thing that I love teaching teachers about, because they get really shocked by it. But one of the big problems with error feedback is that it needs to be instantaneous. So in doing a test, and then collecting the test, and then marking the test, and then giving back the test, means I don't have error feedback. because of the fact that it's not instantaneous. And kids don't look at their exam. They look at the mark, you know, I got 60 or whatever.
Yeah.
But they don't then go through and look at ones that they got wrong. So that's a wrong way to give error feedback.
Right.
The other wrong way to give error feedback is to ask a question and get kids to put up their hand. Because as soon as you get kids to put up their hand, what you have is you have Hermione Granger putting up their hand and being correct. But then all of the kids in the class who don't happen to like Hermione Granger or think she's a smart ass, sorry, that I shouldn't have said that. Sorry, don't like Hermione Granger for any reason. That they turn off because they're not connected to it. And you have to have connection with whoever you're actually learning from to learn from. So as soon as she puts up their hand, half the kids who don't like Hermione Granger turn off and don't listen, so they're not going to learn anything. And they're the kids who actually want to learn. Hermione Granger already knew the answer, so she got it right. We don't learn anything if we get it right. That's the other big thing that
exactly, yes,
realize. You never learn anything unless you get it right. You've got to get it wrong to actually learn something, right? And so the student who got it right didn't learn anything. All the students that would have got it wrong actually turn off, so they don't learn anything. So no one's actually learned something when you do that, ask the question and put your hand up. What you need to do is ask the question and then give them the answer straight away. Because if I ask you what the rats eat, you automatically think of the answer, yeah? And then I can then give you the answer. And if you're wrong, then you've got automatic feedback, yeah? You've got instantaneous feedback, so you can update your memory of that and you can correct it. If you were right, then you didn't learn anything, but you wouldn't learn anything anyway because you already knew the answer to that. So giving them the question and then the answers instantaneously actually is much better for learning, right? That's a much better way to give error feedback and give instantaneous error feedback. By doing tests, it really doesn't work. And by giving tests and then giving them to the other student to actually mark is even worse, because then the kids who didn't know it get really, you feel as though they're not part of the group. And the other thing you were talking about, which is attention, and there's a real assumption amongst teachers that if students are looking at you, then they're attending to you. And we know that they're not, or they're not necessarily doing that, right? I can sit here, or I can sit in a class and have my eyes on a teacher and be attending to the kid beside me who's chatting to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Or thinking about what I did last night, or doing, right? To actually have true attention, you've actually got to be attending to the teacher. And that comes from connection. So you've got to have connection with the kids. And so they're actually interested in what you have to say and are actually connected to you. And we know those teachers who have great connection with all the kids. And we know those teachers that connect with some kids and not with other kids. And then we know those teachers who don't connect with anybody and probably should think about another profession. But you need to have connection with kids, and you need to have connection with all the kids. And that's all about in-groups and out-groups. And within classrooms and within society, and one of the big problems with America at the moment is there's in-groups and out-groups. And we've evolved to have in-groups and out-groups. It's really, really important for us, especially from an evolutionary perspective. And we create them really, really quickly and really, really easily. And so within a classroom, you're going to have the in-group, which is all the ones that like the teacher and feel as though they're part of the teacher. And then you're going to have out-groups. And those out-groups actually hear what the teacher's saying differently. So there's now some really nice neuroimaging data from actually a colleague of mine up in Queensland showing that if you feel as though you're part of the in-group, then you hear people from the in-group differently than if you're part of the out-group. And what you hear and what you actually attend to is completely different between the two. So which is why we're getting separation, right? Which is why if you're a lefty and you go to a right-wing rally, you don't hear anything that the speakers are saying. You hear it completely differently to the other people who are there because of the fact that you're in group or out group. But it means we've actually got to create in groups in the classroom where everybody feels as though they're part of that group. And you can do that really easily. Again, I do a course on it, how to create one big in group within the classroom by mixing up the class and by getting different kids to teach within the class. Because again, as you said, kids learn better from other kids than they do from the teacher. So actually getting kids to teach within the classroom, implicitly or explicitly is really important. And that can actually create groups or create a larger group that encompasses everybody so that they all listen and they're all part of that group. And then they attend to the teacher much better.
And we have, one of the outcomes we have is connected to the world, children feel connected to the world. And again, specific to after school care and to teaching environment or parenting for that matter.
Yeah.
I'm not a parent. All I have is dogs, so what do I know? But in terms of classroom teaching and for after school care, this attention is considered important. Yes, yeah, but it's kind of demanded to some extent. Like, you pay attention to me because I'm talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that the first one was not, before attention, we have this connection. If you are connected, you are paying attention. And today, what you just mentioned about the left wing, right wing, about in and out group. If I'm not connected to you, I'm listening to you differently.
Mm.
It's not that you've said something different, but I'm just listening. The narrative has just shifted so much. Yeah. So if you are a staff member, educator who facilitates this learning in after school care or anything, and the first point is, the connection, that is to create that relationship with children, which needs a lot of work at times. Because in after school care, for my people who work in after school care, the children who are in prep and then or kindergarten for New South Wales, and then we have year 6, and we have 121 of them together. And then here you are talking to each one of them, different age groups, and all of that is happening. And then you're making connection with them, or at least you're staying consistent with who you are. And then people start, if not on the day one, then maybe in 3 months' time, they say, you know what, she always is, or he always is there, or something like that. But that's a huge thing, that, these 5 steps, maybe when Barbi, I've written these 5 steps down, and I think same. I'm sure that you would have had too, but Barbi has a very artistic way of putting things down. So, I'm glad that she has, because I know that something really nice on Facebook is going to be written on that. That means, so maybe this is what educators can benefit from in terms of how are they doing these 5 things themselves or not.
Yeah, and to side note there, I've been listening. Mark has his own podcast for anyone listening called Connectors Teachers Academy podcast, and I took some notes on it earlier with pen and paper, and the quote I took down was, creativity is greater when using pen and paper. And then how you said that, Saurabh, so I'm not typing my notes on my laptop as we talk. It's harder, but I'm handwriting them because there's something about it too. Even the retention, I think I wrote a quote about the retention is better with pen and paper rather than it's almost like you type it and it's just goes, whereas when you write it down, I personally too, I remember it more. So I've written 5 pages since we started this this episode for myself.
Okay, you win. I'm on 3 pages.
It's the retention. I don't know what it is with my memory. Mark will probably be able to figure it out, but I just don't remember things. So this is my way of helping me remember it. Even if you ask me what were we talking about 2 minutes ago, I'd be kind of a bit like, oh, I don't know. Oh, I'll go check this. So that's what I do.
Maybe we should have timestamps. Hey, we should have timestamps on this.
But the one thing, I know it was connection actually that we were talking about. I'm a big firm advocate for that. And I know we might say it's hard. So for instance, I had 400 kids that attended my service, and I felt I had a pretty good connection with nearly all of them. So I know we may say it's hard. I don't know how school principals feel too. I think there's some principals that do, even though they're not in a classroom, try and learn what they can about them, make that connection. Because I have to admit, because I used to be very active and on the floor, and then I fell pregnant and I had to come off the floor. And I noticed that connection dissipating quite a lot, especially with the new children starting. And it was just a bit different trying to start those conversations rather than trying to make an organic connection whilst already doing an activity. And they actually, or you might see them doing something, learning something, playing, and learning about them in their environment. I felt it's just different. I don't know if I'm explaining that too well. So I felt from an office, I couldn't make a connection. I think getting out there and actually physically making them learning, not forceful either, like just going up to, oh, hi, you're new. I'm like wanting them to like you straight away. That's not going to work. They usually just look at you like, who are you? Who is this crazy lady talking to me?
That happens.
I remember too, I had one girl, it took me a few years before she actually started talking to me, and I was like, yes. I didn't harass her, but I also didn't give up. Like I've wanted to keep trying and building on that relationship. The other thing which we can do, because it's also pretty impossible for one person to connect with 400 kids authentically and well, is making sure that others within your team are connecting with the children. It's like what a principal would do in a school. They've got the teachers to make those individual class connections with their 30 kids. And I know, say, for me, with 400 kids throughout the week, we only had 150 max at a time. We had 30 staff. So there was a lot of staff between there to engage with children. And there are some children that just gravitate to some staff more than others. But because they had that connection, I felt this type of learning, because when they had that connection, they were more engaged. Mm-hmm. So Saurubh's seen an educator that I worked with. He got 150 children together, sat down straight away. He stopped them playing too and got them all to come sit down. And it took a couple of minutes. I feel like if that was anywhere else, that would take a long time. But a lot of those children had a connection with that staff member, and they were more than happy to go listen to him for a minute or two and genuinely listen.
And I visited his service because he is now coordinator of in his own service, and he did that again.
Yeah, because he builds those relationships.
And not for long, in and out, children knew what they were getting into. Children knew, and I'm not saying again that that's the way we measure success. I'm not necessarily saying that you unless you do that, you're not making connection. But that is how he measures his connection. Children were gravitated to him, and that's what happened. And his name is Scott.
He's fantastic.
Scott, he's good. So and when I went up and we gave each other a big high five and we hugged, we were like, yes, we did it, and it was an amazing one. And again, we talked about technology and all of that. Do you think that when people are technology driven, that it does something to the connection, like the possible connection?
Yeah, so it's amazing. Even this study's now showing that if you've got one of these and you sit down at a table and put that on the table, the conversation you have with the other person is significantly less significant. Significant is not the right word. Meaningful in what you actually talk about. So the conversations we have when we have a mobile phone placed in front of us is less meaningful, and we're less likely to bring up things that are personal when someone has a mobile phone in front of them, which is pretty concerning. But we also know that there's a great study. Well, there's been lots now, but one of them, they took grade 6 children on a camp where they didn't have access to any devices. And they showed that those kids had a significant increase or improvement in their facial expression ability just after 5 days of not being on a device. Now, this was average kids with average amount of time on devices, and yet they were obviously significantly deficit in their ability to recognize facial expression before they went on their camp. And just 5 days without a device, and they improved. We also know there's lots of studies going on in the US over the last 4 or 5 years showing that carers who have mobile phones, the children that they look after have poorer facial expression perception. Now, facial expression perception, it's one of my areas of study, which I find fascinating, and I've studied for a long time, but it is crucial for empathy. Now, we don't understand how other people are feeling if we can't recognize the facial expressions, because that's how we do it, and we do it really, really well. But these children who are growing up with carers who use their mobile phones regularly have a deficit in their ability to recognize facial expression. So it does have this real significant impact on that. We also know that kids, even if they're using those collaboration apps, are more likely to argue and are more likely to have disputes if they're on a device versus doing the same thing with paper. So as soon as you put a child on a device, they're more likely to have a dispute with another child if they're collaborating. And that's whether they have separate devices or if they're working on the same device. And it's because we get so much information from actually looking at each other. So when we look at each other, we notice body language, we notice facial expressions, we notice the tone and intonation of the voice and so on. All that information gives us necessary information about how the person's feeling, how they're reacting to your ideas, how you're reacting to their ideas and so on. If you're on a device, they're designed for you to look at the screen. And if you're looking at the screen, then you're not looking at the other person. And so therefore, there's disputes and interruptions with that. So yeah, devices are really have a significant impact on our ability to collaborate, have a significant deficit in our ability to recognize facial expressions, to have empathy with other kids. So they're impacting on all those things. They're also impacting on learning. We know that simply being on a device, you get increasing stress. We know that you learn less when you're on a device. So there's a huge amount of studies showing if you give a child a PDF, which is on a device, versus a PDF printed out piece of paper, and then you test them, if they've got the same amount of time, the kids who learn it on a piece of paper are better, retain more of the information than they do if they're on a device. So they actually learn less if they're on a device. That's also now being shown, very interesting study here in Australia in primary school, showing that if you learn how to type, you have poorer reading ability than if you learn how to write with a pen. Now, we don't know why that is yet, but just writing with a pen, learning how to write with a pen and learning how to read results in better reading ability than learning how to type and learning how to read, which, yeah, is a really interesting effect.
And all we do now is type.
Yeah, and we should. We should have, yeah, as you both do have notepads, which I have thousands of them, and we should be writing. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that, is that when you write a letter, it's a different motor pattern for each letter that you write, yeah? Whereas when you type, it's exactly the same motor pattern because you're just pushing a button and it doesn't matter which letter you're pushing. It's exactly the same. Now, as I talked about before, you want different neurons coding for the different things so that you actually have different memory traces. So you need a different pattern. So when you write, you've got a different pattern. You don't have that different pattern when you type, so you don't remember it as well. You also create links and anchors when you use a pad, which you don't get on a device. So one of the reasons kids don't remember as well on a device as they do on paper is that we remember things. I've got a book here. You remember things based on where you're reading them. So if you read something up here, you remember it based on the fact that it was read here rather than down here. Or whatever. And that's how we remember things. On a device, you don't get that because it all scrolls through. Whereas if you write in a notepad, you write in a notepad, then you create those anchors, yeah, that you can use. And I always laugh. I can always tell my best students, last year, my first year neuroscience course had 900 students in it. And I could tell on the first day when they come into lecture theatre, which ones are going to be the high distinction students, because they come in with notepads and they come in with lots of stationery. And the kids who have lots of stationery are usually the better students because they create all these anchors on their notes, yeah, because they do little swirly things and they do them in different colours and all these things. And they create really good anchors for them to actually remember those notes when they're actually doing their exams. So writing on paper is awesome. And of course, you're going to save the environment too, because the more paper we use, the more carbon we're using up, taking it out of the atmosphere. As long as it's recycled, as long as it's from green and we plant more trees, then you're actually taking more carbon out of the environment. So you're going to save the environment as well. Whereas devices, of course, are very, very taxing on the environment. So there's other positives as well.
One thing. Oh, sorry, Sarah.
You go.
I was thinking of something too. So back, Mark, you said that facial expression perception, so a study area of yours, is crucial for empathy. I know we spoke about it in children, but one thing in out of school hours care, a lot of our staff are aged between the 18 and 23 age bracket, and they're probably the ones that have spent the last 10 years on devices. And I'm not sure anyone listening how they think, like, would we be expected to notice a bit of issues with staff picking up on empathy and things like that as well, like not just the children, it can also now be, because now they're adults, these children that have grown up with devices now adults, those issues I'm sure will be carrying on, like socially.
I have no doubt. There hasn't been any studies in that age group yet that has looked at that, but given there's such a big impact that we know already in the children that we've been studying, no doubt there must be an impact at that level as well. And we do know that there's more stress and more anxiety, more depression in that age group. There's been lots of studies showing that there's been a huge increase in depression and anxiety and suicide in that age group. So that suggests that they are having more trouble with empathy and understanding other people's facial expressions.
And that's true. Now, most schools you go to now, you or I have gone, there is an issue in recognizing a child's story, because there's so much of your own story in between that. If a child is walking towards you, just walking fast-paced, that could be considered as aggression. Whereas a child walking towards me, I'm like, as soon as he comes close to me, I'm like, hey, closer to me, I'm like, hey, how was your day? And I can protect myself by saying, what's going on? What's happening? Like, we'll see what's happening very soon. Let him come over all the way here. So such, and given as Mark had earlier said that, you listen to things differently. So if you listen to things differently, you narrate differently. So a child walking towards you, if you've already considered that as an act of aggression, then you are going to act accordingly. And if learning is the outcome, let's say, and we are learning, learning is an outcome as an educator. As soon as we call ourselves an educator, learning is the outcome. Let's say, what learning we don't. But if learning is the outcome, then connection is the step number one.
I was about to say that. Yeah.
So. And if devices are in the way of connection to some capacity, maybe they connect you in some capacities. I'm sure there are positive points of that too. But I think before I clicked recording, Mark was talking about how we can use it for our own benefit. But if whatever it is, how you're marking roles now, because we have 200 people, we going away from paperwork, we're looking at iPads to mark roles. So even when the kids are coming, we mark them on the iPad. And then I saw a service where I had a mobile phones with every educator, and they were texting on WhatsApp as to who's going home and who's not, because they have spread out rooms far off, and they have like 200 plus children coming in. So they can't always be on walkie-talkies because they have like 40 staff members on the floor. So not interfere with children's learning, they just text a person at the gate. And one educator had a really good idea. He had a television. So what he did was he just mirrored his phone on the television. So, and he puts his phone away and everybody sees the television. Somebody's going home. So he's like, hey, you're going home, you're going home. And so he negotiated his own way out of looking here, but then, hey, you're going home. And it's just like a whiteboard, which keeps changing. It was a really good idea he had. But people don't have screens. So they always have to keep looking on their phone. And even when I'm talking to them, hey, I have a nice strategy, like, oh, hang on. And it's not for me. Yeah. That's what happened. So, but yeah, connection and how technology, and I'm looking at my own connection. I'm going to put my phone away now when I'm talking to people.
Well, we had dinner the other night, Saurubh, and we all had our phones out except for James. I know. So he normally never does. So that's my husband. But there was 5 of us. Yeah, I can count. And 4 of us all had our phones on the table. We probably don't even realize it.
And the scary thing is that we know from lots of studies now that even if you have your phone turned off and in the glove box of your car, 10% of your attention is still on your phone, even though it's turned off and it's in your glove box. So that's 10% of your attention, which is equivalent to having 1 standard drink. And that's if it's turned off and it's in your glove box. If it's turned on, it's beside you and it buzzes or makes any sort of noise, then 100% of your attention is on the phone, not on what you're actually doing. And that's in adults. In kids who don't have prefrontal cortex fully developed, because that doesn't fully develop till you're 25, that controls your attention. So it's far worse for a child. And we know there's if they have their phone beside them on their desk and it's turned off, their IQ goes down. So their intelligence, there's a significant decrease in their intelligence, and there's a significant decrease in their working memory. So your working memory is your ability to actually think.
Yeah.
And that's significantly affected by having the phone turned off and either beside them or in a bag somewhere where they could actually get to it. The only way you can get rid of it is to have it turned off and have it somewhere where you can't access it. Yeah, which is a problem for teachers, because if your teacher has the phone on them, then 10% of their attention is on the phone. So it's equivalent to having a drink. And you're not allowed to drink at work. Yeah.
You're teaching all drunk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not like...
So 100% of the attention goes to it. So therefore, they're not attending to the kids during that period. And it takes about 90 seconds for you to get your attention back. And that's if you don't look at it.
Oh.
That's if you don't look at it. If you actually...
But if you looked at it, then you are having that conversation in your head.
Yeah, you're actually, looking at that. And so you're not actually attending. You don't have any awareness of what's going on outside of that phone for that period of time that you're actually attending to it.
So this is a good point for, I don't know how you felt, Sarah, sometimes because most of our staff in our school hours care are that 18 to 23-year-old university bracket, the amount of times I know I had to do as a leader trying to tell them to put their phone away while supervising children. I know for me it was because I wanted them to have that connection and so they could see if anything was going to happen, but you've also got this type of attention thing. So 90 seconds to get back, there could be two kids escalating and they've completely missed it and they're both in fist fights. But if they didn't do that, that may have never happened, that incident, because they were perceptive of it and being able to see it.
So it just interferes with their connection because they don't have, like they're there, but they're not present.
Yeah.
For me, it's I just thought if I put my phone away where I can't reach, I actually have 200% on my anxiety attention. Where's my phone? Where's my phone? Who's calling me? Who's calling me? And the depressive thing is, you looked at your phone, it had been switched off for some reason or was out of reach for 15, 20 minutes. You look at it and you go, nobody contacted me. What? So I mean, you think I'm not that popular now, am I? So, but your brain has already played 15 different scenarios of how the life would have been if you had your phone with you. But yet when you look at your phone, nobody cares about you today, sir. Nobody has texted you anything. I'm like, damn it. So you did all of that for nothing.
Yeah, and one of the wonderful things about these things is that they've got a memory in them, right? So if you miss a call or if you get a text or whatever, it actually holds it in there.
Yeah.
The people have this idea that you have to check it straight away. But that's one of the things that I try to explain is that these are amazing computers that can hold a lot of information. They can even hold more than one text. They can hold like hundreds of texts that you haven't checked yet. And they can hold them for hours and hours, even days. They can actually hold those things for. Yeah. And so you don't actually have to check every time it buzzes. You don't have to check every time. And I turn off all the notifications. I don't even
same.
On my phone. And I choose when I'm going to look at it, right? Rather than having it choose when I've got to look at it, right?
Yeah.
Most people react to it. Whereas what I do is I choose times when I check my phone. And, you know, it'll ring if there's a phone call because people don't call anymore unless it's an emergency, right?
Oh,
but
they don't.
Otherwise, do they? Unless it's those.
No, they don't.
No, they don't.
And they don't answer calls either.
And neither do they answer. Exactly.
So yeah, I have it all turned off. So therefore, I don't get distracted by it. And I choose when I'm going to actually look at it. I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of time we actually spend looking at our phones. And like, what is it? 70% of people say that they will actually check their phone when they're having a conversation with a family member. You know, that they'll actually check a text. That just astounds me. But I mean, there's 10% of people will check a text when they're having sex. So nothing really. I don't know who these people are, but.
And look at the audacity. They're like, oh, I have a survey question to answer. I'm going to answer yes to that because I'm one of them. Like, that's interesting. I also think when you talk about evolutionary impact, given that if it is happening more and more, do you think that this would impact in the way we evolve? Lack of facial recognition, more, and therefore lack of connection, lack of learning, and therefore a different type of narrative which exists in us that is, I'm threatened, I'm alone, or people don't understand me. Because although you're not recognizing their facial recognition, but you are somehow giving yours out, but people are not understanding you anymore because they have evolved in a way. I mean, if your face looked like an emoji, maybe people will understand you more because people understand emoji more than facial recognition, I guess. So maybe, but if your face looks like mine and it doesn't look like an emoji, then perhaps in a way that people would stop understanding me, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to think about where we're headed. I'm actually writing a book. I took voluntary redundancy at the end of last year, and so I'm writing a book on us as a connected species. And the fact that for over 12 million years, we developed an ability to socialize with each other, that is based all on non-language. We've only had language for about 100,000 years, right? Whereas for 12 million years, we didn't have language, yet we were social. We still lived in groups and we still interacted with each other. And that's all based on our ability to recognize facial expressions, our in-groups and out-groups that we associate with that, our implicit recognition of facial expressions and body language, and communicating through those things. Now, that's 12 million years of evolution, and we're extremely good at it. Yet today, we don't use all of that, or we ignore all of that. Now, the big problem is that, and this is the area of expertise for a long time, our amygdala is the area that actually responds to facial expressions and responds to them automatically. So some of my original work showed that even when you're unaware of a face, you don't even see it, your amygdala is still responding to it, depending on what facial expression it is. Now, your amygdala controls your fight or flight response. So it sets off your fight or flight response. It increases your heart rate, increases the blood to your muscles, dilates your eyes so you can see better, gets you ready to either have a fight or run away. That happens automatically when there's a facial expression in your periphery that you're not actually looking at. So if you're looking at a phone all the time and there's people in your periphery, and even if they're smiling, I showed that even if they're smiling, your fight or flight response will be set off because your brain can't recognize whether or not smiling or not. It can only recognize that there's a facial expression that you need to attend to. And if you're avoiding that by actually looking at your phone, your fight or flight response goes off, which means that you get an increased heart rate and all those things. That increased heart rate and the fight or flight response without actually checking it is what causes anxiety disorders, right? Anxiety disorders are caused by an overactive fight or flight response. Now, if we're all checking our phones all the time rather than actually looking at people, then our fight or flight response is on all the time.
Yeah.
And so we have this really negative, And so if teachers, carers are looking at their phones all the time rather than actually look at the people around them, they're going to feel anxious just because their fight or flight response is going.
So I have a question which people might have, and I'm very thankful for all the time you're giving, Mark, for this. And this is very, now we have amazing educators. Some educators do not look at their phones, they just leave their phones aside and they are with children. However, children have been in the class from the day started, classroom iPads, or in the morning, parents just gave them a tablet while they were having breakfast so that they don't
the watches. A lot have watches now.
Watches, watches. And when they come to after school care, they have already been associated to some extent or to a large extent to technology around them, smartphones, tablets, watches. And now one of, let's say, our educators are trying to do this learning experience, basketball, cricket, and all that kind of thing. And because there's some incompleteness in someone's head, that is, I started this game in the morning and I looked at it in the lunchtime that I really need, my friends in America are sitting for me and I really need to get on and talk to them about that. For an educator who is trying to build connection with children, do you think that it is too late by 4 p.m. for a staff member to try to get attention or to motivate children to like, hey, put that away and look at me and something like that? Or have you seen anyone do anything which strategizes because as an adult, we are learning the impacts of it. So we might put it away, but as a child, it's like a sugar hit. It's not good, but you still want your sugar, So how might you encourage kids? Is it a matter of conversation or parent conversation or teacher conversation?
I think it starts with the parents and with the teachers. I don't think the kids, again, kids are kids, right? We need as the adults to actually be showing them what's best, right? Rather than us expecting them to know what's best or doing the right thing.
Modeling.
Right? Modeling, yeah. I do a lot of presentations for parents and for teachers. The presentations are slightly different, but based on the same premise. But I also think whatever institution it is, the institution needs to make a decision as well. And the institution needs to say, we actually are about educating the kids for them to be the best adults they can be in the future, to learn how to be, appropriate adults. And that is not through devices. And it doesn't work with devices. And so therefore, while you're at this institution, you don't have those devices. And
right.
I've worked with a lot of schools around that. Some take that on and decide that, and that's what they decide to do. Others don't. But whenever you don't, I feel whenever it's half-half, you have that problem, is that you're sort of defaulting to the poor teacher who then has to take the laptop off the child or take the phone off the child or whatever. And I don't think that's fair on the teacher. I think it should be an institution thing where the institution, whatever institution happens to be, says this is the way it's going to be. Parents, if you want to send your kids here, this is what they're going to learn and this is why we're doing it. And so therefore that's going to be a situation. And then when the kids arrive, they know that's it. Right? There's no choice in that, rather than having a situation where the poor teacher or supervisor or carer or whatever has to make that decision on their own, which I think is unfair.
Exactly. It's an institutional decision, not just an emotional staff member.
Yeah.
Because then they say, I hate her, but I love her because she allows me and she doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. But, we know now that learning's affected by devices. Empathy is affected by devices, facial expression perceptions are affected by devices, connections affected by devices, collaborations affected by devices. So why would you allow those things into schools or into after-school care or into any of these institutions where you're actually trying to mould kids into great adults? And they don't need them. If they want to play with them at home at night or whatever, then fine. But these institutions should be about learning and should be about making them the best adults they can be.
So it's what I learned is neuroplasticity, fire and wire. So those things don't fire, they don't wire. Facial recognition is impacted by our connection. Let's say not just facial. The connection is impacted by devices and adults and children, and therefore those amygdala is working overtime in these responses and getting stressful because we are actually not learning one component of connection, which is the facial recognition. In absence of language, we have been relying on this and the body behavior. So we are trained for that, but our amygdala is now stressed because it's no more getting that, because not only that I'm looking at my phone, but also the other person is looking at his phone. So I'm like, hey, can you show me your facial recognition just for a second? I just want to see how you look like right now. And you talk to me.
You're not going to attack me, right?
Yeah, exactly. So as an institute of education, if we call it ourselves educators, devices can impact us, our connection, and connection leads to learning. The first step is connection, which leads to learning or absence of learning or wrong learning, because we will hear differently. So we are learning, but if you're not paying attention to this, we definitely are paying attention to something else. So we are paying attention, but to perhaps to left wing or right wing or I don't know what, and therefore this is we need these things to fire. We need these connections to fire and therefore wire, rather than the assumption which amygdala makes when it doesn't get to see what others are doing, because that will fire wrong things or undesirable things. But I did the same thing. I was anchoring, I was but I don't have a different color, so I'm not sure if I will get a HD or not. But I was trying. I don't have many stationaries. But I was trying. I was trying to see. Okay, so no, not HD, but maybe credit. Maybe I'll get that.
Everybody.
Thank you very much, Mark. Barbi, do you have anything? I'm just conscious of.
I wrote 6 pages, so I'll summarize this also to go with this for people listening. And I just hope people kind of take it on board. Like you said, people will hear one thing and maybe another, and just to kind of think about it without a perceive. perception of what it is. And I like how you said it's kind of an institution needs to make a decision, but also the expectation is known beforehand. So work with your team together, make that decision, and then put that expectation out there to families, to children, to staff. If you have someone above us, you might be a corporation or something, or a small volunteer parent committee, just make sure that's known. And I feel like that will help have a knock-on effect to the issues you might get from this, or no issues, because that expectation is already set. As well, I think people should be really mindful of the impact of devices, and also that listen to Mark's podcast, because I listen to it. And he's also, it's not that technology is all bad, it's just mindful how we're using it. And one of the quotes that Mark had in there that I wrote down was in his podcast was how to use technology rather than allow technology to use them, like to use us. So we can be mindful of how we're doing that. And your 5 essential things for learning, how key connection is. For number 1, connection, attention, engaged, error, feedback, that being instantaneously, and consolidation.
Nice.
So I've got more, but I'll stop there.
Thanks, Steve.
No, it's great because, you know, the fact is that people, just not now, but also when they listen to it more and more, they'll see how much they get to learn from this. Like when you watch it once and then you watch it again and then you watch it again. So different times, different life experiences, different learning would happen. So that's great. And I definitely know for sure that now when I talk to people, I'm going to use this and I'm going to sound smarter in front of them. Like, hey, you know what? And then I'll say, okay, you can listen to this podcast. And this is where I learned it from. So, but thank you very much, Mark,
Thank you
for your time, for so much of information you've given us. I've learned so much today myself. And I know that I would be listening to this more than once myself to sound smarter and smarter. But other than that, thank you very much for your time, Mark. We would like to have you again if there's something which you know, as you're driving and you think, hey, I would love to add that. Just you're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
With us. And
thank you. If you want me back, I'm more than happy to.
Thank
definitely.
you. That's music to our
come up
ears,
and you want to chat about something, more than happy to.
Yeah,
happy to chat.
Maybe we can do that, Bobby. We can sit down together and write down some challenges and send it to Mark and see what would he like to say about which challenge he would like to pick on and why not? Yeah. So
sounds great.
Thanks for listening to us, people. Thanks again to Mark. We will be adding his podcast link to our when we are putting this description. Thank you again, Barbie. For those who do not see, those who are listening on podcasts and don't get to see the YouTube channel, we have a YouTube channel as well, and you can see how Barbie has rented a room, a work place. That's commitment, and my commitment is that I negotiate with my dog. This takes something. So the way you can support us is through following our page and giving us your ideas and telling us what you would like to hear from us, and perhaps one of you can join us on our channel as a guest and share beautiful ideas. We will be putting all of this on the Firefly page on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, as well as Instagram and Facebook page of We Belong Education. Thank you very much for your participation. Look after yourself and the people you love. It's a goodbye from Osh After the Bell podcast. See you later, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye.